Well, I'll start off with a quick preface, but my dad's going to end up doing most of the chatting today. But the Lord,
which is very unusual, by the way.
The Lord's Prayer, talks about the fact right at the beginning, "Thy kingdom come and Thy will be done." And we say that every Sunday, but those aren't just pretty words. That's really our mission, because the world is full of needs, and we have the opportunity and the privilege as the children of God and as His workers to play a part and meet those needs. And the incredible thing to me with God is that He understands all the needs in the world, and He puts different passions and concerns in our hearts. And so one person is concerned about refugees, another person is concerned about child slavery or sexual trafficking of women. And all these concerns all get met because God lays these things on our hearts. And so we've been talking about that for the last couple of weeks in terms of the refugee situation, in terms of Lutheran World Relief, and some of those things. And today, just going to be visiting with my dad, and he's going to be sharing just some of the ways that he's been spending time in Africa over the last 40, 50 years. The things that we've seen in the news, in headlines on the news, on our TVs, he's been living there in terms of the genocides and the famines. And so we're going to talk a little bit about kind of how he lived out "Thy kingdom come" in terms of what's going on. And I happen to know him pretty well, of course. I was homeschooled until I was in 5th grade. And the rule was, as soon as I finished my schoolwork for the day, I could go up to the hangar and hang out with Dad and work on the plane, or go flying with him if there's room in the plane. So I was generally done with school by about 9:30 in the morning. I got up early and did that because we had so much fun. So we're going to be kind of, our process today is, first, we're going to take kind of a 30,000-foot view of just kind of his 40 years in Africa and the different kinds of projects and things that he was involved in, to give you a sense of that. And then, unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about when he was captured in Sudan, and pretty much a James Bond style story of how he got out of Sudan and came back to us alive. We'll talk about that maybe some other day, or about his airplane program. Maybe we'll just mention that briefly. But what we want to talk about is just kind of that, some of those events and how God used that. And then we want to talk about some of the individuals, because the events of history are interesting, but what's really important is the lives that intersect our lives and how we can play a role in that to change them. And so kind of make it personal, and then talk a little bit about how life changes, right? And so at 86 years old, my dad's not flying a plane and flying grain, that sort of thing around, but the Bible doesn't have any theology about retirement in it. At least I haven't found that yet. And he's taking that seriously. And so how at this stage in his life is he trying to stay engaged in ministry through the things that he knows? And many of those things have nothing to do with flying or the stuff that he knew about. It's just things that God has put on his heart. And we'll talk about that. And then we will hopefully have time for questions and that sort of thing, if you like. So that's pretty much what I got for a preface. So let me get your PowerPoint started. Hang on one second here. We're going to share that. I think we are ready to go.
All right.
Move that over there.
So do you want me to take over?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I kind of figure that life is sort of like a flight plan. And you have to kind of think what your goals are. Before I took off out in Africa, I had to think ahead, and the flight started long before the wheels ever left the ground. Mm-hmm. Is the airplane airworthy? I'm a mechanic, so have I done my inspections? And what's the weather going to be like? Do I have enough fuel to get there and get back again safely? But then even more, what is the purpose of the flight? Is the risk of flying over hundreds of miles of solid jungle in a single engine airplane worth the risk? And can I get back home safely with that? So I kind of have to think, what is our calling in life? Why are we making this trip? And so we think of Jesus, of course, as our guide. Mm-hmm. His goal was to seek and save the lost. That was his life calling. And so what is ours? So let me give you a little glimpse of what we did. I spent 42 years with Missionary Aviation Fellowship. And as you can see the map, I lived all over Africa. But when I first went to Africa in 1964, I took that calling very seriously. I was looking for the lost, to seek and save the lost. One day I was flying up to Victoria Falls. Sorry you couldn't be along. But I was out over the Zambezi River Valley and right below Zambia, northern Rhodesia in those years. And I saw thousands of miles with no roads, totally isolated, and yet I saw villages down there. And I realized these people are probably the target that I was looking for. And so I recruited 2 Southern Baptist missionaries, and we went looking for those villages that I had marked on the map. And we did find this Batonga tribe, very, very isolated, and obviously never before seen the outside world. Now, Wycliffe Bible translators tell us that there are 2,300 languages like this in the world who have never heard the name of Christ. And so for the next 8 or 10 years, before I went up to the Congo, I built 28 airstrips in those villages, and I picked up these 2 missionaries every other week, and we spent the entire week in those villages. We hit 3 of them a day, and of course we started out with physical needs, and Dr. Kanata would diagnose. He was a surgeon, and yet we didn't do much surgery. We did all routine healthcare, and he diagnosed, and then he'd pass them on to me, and I gave out the pills, and I did the injections. Now, I don't have any medical experience. So when there's no lawyers,
well, not when you started.
when there's no lawyers around, you can do anything. But this is our sterilizing equipment. But really, God was opening their hearts, and in village after village, they were wanting to hear what we had to say. While we were treating the people, Bud Frey was out evangelizing them, telling them about Jesus and why they should accept Christ. Now, we all spoke the Shona language, and that was the trade language in the area. And one of the other missionaries had done 100 tapes of stories of Jesus out of the Bible, New Testament. So I had 100 tapes of Rungano Rajesu. I can still speak Shona.
Yeah.
And
Jakanaka.
and so we would leave these little recorders. Now, these people had no radios, no contact with the outside world, and the headman in the village had a cassette recorder. You think he didn't have an audience? And so they wore out the tapes and wore out the batteries before we got back. And by the time I got ready to go up to Congo, we had 150 churches in the Batonga area, and the whole tribe had come to Christ by now. So back home, we were living on an Evangelical Alliance Mission hospital station, 150 miles out in the bush, in the jungle. It's not jungle in Rhodesia, but it's bush country. And all of the mission stations around us had no doctor. So that's why MEF put me into Rhodesia to do a flying doctor service with this doctor and a pastor and a medical team. We fly out often into the other mission stations around and do emergency surgeries and extreme medical cases. This guy was burned seriously when his hut caught on fire. So day after day, I was called on the radio to go out and fly out and pick up medevac patients. But I also flew the patients in, and they'd be crying the death wail when I left, thinking they'd never see these people again. But 6 weeks later, I fly them back home, and they're happy and rejoicing. And occasionally, they didn't make it. And I would have to fly their bodies back home, because in that culture, it's extremely important for the people to be buried in their family villages. But day after day, we were serving extreme cases of every kind imaginable. Marilee ran the books, and she was the business manager of the station. But MEF furnishes aircraft transportation, but also we have a radio department. And so we put these radios into all the mission stations, and now they can talk to each other.
Yeah, which they couldn't before. That's an important thing, is to think about what it was like for these missionaries who would travel months sometimes to get out to some place out in the jungle and have no contact with the outside world at all. And you were able to come and put these radios at every single station. Suddenly they could talk to each other, and if they had a problem, they could chat, or of course call for the plane.
And they'd call in, and Marilee would link them up with the doctor so they could get medical answers. So she really ran the program and scheduling for me, but she also taught in the nursing school. And that's Dan hanging up next to her, by the way. No. But it was a family affair. This was our mode of transport, because you can't get through the bush without a motorcycle. So every Sunday found us out in the villages.
I spent a lot of Sundays sitting on that rock. Growing up, that's a little village called Jaya.
And I was out there at least 1 or 2 nights a week trying to get churches started in the surrounding community. I thought maybe you'd like to see Dan as a young man. This was his school classroom. Marilee homeschooled him for, like she said, several years before he went off to boarding school. And these are our 2 daughters. But in 1964, we first went to Africa, and Diane was born down in Zimbabwe 6 days after we got to Africa for the first time. By 70, my youngest son was born in the Belgian Congo, of course, in the middle of the jungle, no doctor around, so a midwife delivered David. But we went into the Congo just at the end of a 10-year bloody independence war.
Mhm.
There's a plaque up in Brussels with 202 names of missionaries that were killed during that 10-year period. And so we started the program there. Missionaries could not come back into the Congo, or would not come back because of the bloodshed, unless they had air transportation and radio communications. So Congo is the second largest country in Africa. It's 1,800 miles across the jungle to the capital city of Kinshasa. And it's only 500 miles across Uganda out to we said the closest gas station grocery in Nairobi. But it's extreme isolation, and there are airstrips like this built. We build them, but it's the only contact with the outside world. And once they are built, we have a contact for the first time. This is why they call us bush pilots. I did over 10,000 flight hours in 8 different countries of Africa and built many strips like this. And this is the reason why we have to have airplanes. This is the only road out of the Eastern Congo jungle out to East Africa. Many of these trucks have been there for years and will never leave this road. They're caught in the mud, and there's no gas station. There's no tow truck here come and get you. Now, I had to get my fuel for the airplane over this road, 800 miles away in Mombasa, Kenya. When I first went to Congo, we were 500 miles away from our supply line in Nairobi. The difficulty was I had to fly over Uganda, and Idi Amin was there. He was a bloody dictator. Nobody could drive through Uganda in those years.
That's another story we could tell another time about meeting Idi Amin one night. But
yeah, I got forced down there a couple times.
I was thinking when we went to Jomo Kenyatta's funeral.
Yeah,
but,
I know. And
so,
anyway, I had a personal invitation from
Idi Amin.
Idi Amin. But anyway, then when I couldn't get over for like clearances for Entebbe, I would have to fly around Uganda, which made an 800-mile trip and put us over the incredible Serengeti plains. The beauty of Africa is spectacular. You think we are sacrifices to go to Africa? No, we get to see stuff like this, the migration. Now, I had to fly the high school kids. These are my 2 daughters. I had to fly them out to Nairobi 6 times a year for boarding school. And they loved it when Dad would fly down 50 feet off the backs of these animals. But because of all the flying to Nairobi, by 1980, I finally talked MAF into buying a heavy twin like this, turboprop, a small airliner, and I moved to Nairobi to set up an international flight service to all the countries surrounding, because it was getting harder and harder to get supplies.
Yeah, the roads during the colonial era, not saying that was good at all, but they built infrastructure all through Africa, and there was good roads that were built and maintained. You used to be able to drive all the way across the jungle in the Congo in just a couple of days. And when the colonial groups came out, all work on any of those roads went away, and now you can't even drive across the Congo anymore. It's been decades since you've been able to drive.
There used to be a car dealer in Bunia, and when we were there, you couldn't buy a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
So the infrastructure totally disappeared.
So yeah, that's why you had to
anyway,
have some way to
but
get
it was
supplies.
fun. It was fun to get this little airliner, and this was our flight crew at the time, but a bunch of handsome guys. And this is our hangar in Nairobi, Kenya. These are the 2 airplanes I flew the most, actually. But our first flight in Congo was an amazing flight. We brought in a whole load of Pasandi Bibles.
So
it's a tribal.
Pasandi is a language.
Yes, it's a tribal language. And Miss Unning has spent 40 years translating the Pasandi Bible. And the year before, I had flown that manuscript out 800 miles over the solid jungle in a single engine airplane, hoping I didn't crash and ruin 40 years. And now the Bible is translated and we could fly it back in for them. They have a Bible in their own language. Then by 84, I was asked to go up to Ethiopia. This is Ted Engstrom. Let's go back to that. Okay, this is Ted Engstrom, the head of World Vision. And the reason we went there was because of a 10-year drought. The silent assassin of hunger killed 30 million people. Hitler only killed 6 million. This drought killed 30 million people. And it was a massive, massive starvation. So we had 2 of these caravans and 2 twin otters, and I was lucky enough to be part of the flight crew. This was one of our medevacs out of Addis Ababa down to Nairobi with one of our guys who got crushed between 2 trucks. But I was assigned to the caravans. And so we flew these airplanes 16 hours a day, never shut the engines off. We could load 3,000 pounds of grain, that's a ton and a half, and refuel on every takeoff in 3 minutes. And then we'd fly across the high mountain canyons of Eritrea, 10 or 15 minute flight, and we could drop the load in a minute and a half on the other side. We kept thousands of people alive, hauling grain to them. And this was a cup of cold water. But a cup of cold water is worthless if it doesn't come in the name of Christ. So this was our Christian response to hunger. It was Mennonite Central Committee grain that came out of Canada, and we were able to distribute it. By 86, I was asked to go into Sudan to fly this airplane out of Khartoum. The ravage of war and starvation was devastating to Sudan. In fact, it's the largest country in Africa. The north is white African Muslim. The south is tropical rainforest, Black Africa, animistic. It's not a lost boys of Africa, it's a lost generation of Africa. And then by 88, I was asked to go up into North Africa to open up a flight program with food across the Sahara. The guy in the blue here is the mayor of Timbuktu. Did you know there was such a place? And the guy in the red shirt red jacket is a congressman, the rest of World Vision people. But Muslim is 98% Muslim. Mali is 98% Muslim. So we would never be able to get there except for the famine. So God created a famine to allow missions to come in.
Or at least allowed the famine to.
Well, for whatever reason,
yeah.
we were able to come. Now this is the superhighway that runs out of Bamako, Mali, up into the desert 300 or 400 miles, into Timbuktu and other desert. You can go by a Jeep or you can go by camel. But there are virtually no roads, and you'll fly hundreds of miles away from any little village, and you'll look down and there's some tents down there. And if you look up in the top of the picture, you'll see some animals over along this wadi that are trying to survive. Now these people have to survive on their livestock because it's too dry to farm. So they have to have cattle. And so they have to wander across, that's why they're nomads. They have to wander across the deserts looking for these ancient wells that their ancestors have dug, and the little bit of grass that might have grown a year or 2 or 3 ago when they get 1 or 2 or 3 inches of rain in the desert. But now you're 5 years into a 10-year drought. And when there are no animals, there's no food. And so they were gathering by the thousands around all the little oases looking for World Vision or Red Cross or CARE or somebody to come in and help them. And she is out in the desert trying to find a little bit of grass. That's all she had to eat. Thousands of people, literally thousands of people were starving to death. Yeah, this is Timbuktu in the deserts of North Africa. It is the end of the world. The only reason you're in Timbuktu is you're born there. It's not a tourist destination. It's a mud city. There's not a bag of cement in the whole town. These are the streets of Timbuktu. There's no industry, there's no commerce, but it is an oasis. So there are deep pit wells like this, and they draw water out of the well to irrigate their little garden. And so the people that live in the oasis survive with these little gardens. But if this is your mom, should anybody help? Should anybody care? If this is your brother or your sister or you, would you want somebody to come and help them? This little guy died in my arms that very day. I have never felt so emotionally stressed as to walk through there with clothes and shoes on my feet and money jingling in my pocket. And these people are dying by the hundreds every day. So if we say that we love God, we've got to do something. There's got to be a response in our hearts. And so we help by distributing this fuel. These are World Vision trucks that came up out of Ghana into the deserts of North Africa. And then we flew it out to various relief camps, and we kept thousands of people alive. Then in 93, I went into Angola because of a 40-year civil war. Every road was landmined, and thousands of people had their legs blown off, and multiple thousands had been killed. Let's go back one. In fact, I was flying a Berlin airlift with this airplane over the rebels. 4 airplanes were shot down the first 6 months I was there. So I had to circle straight up, fly high above the gunfire, and then circle down over Cullacammy Hospital. It was the only mission hospital left in the whole country. And Steve Foster had 17 of his people shot or killed off the road. He was ready to close if we couldn't give him some air support because of the 10 million landmines that were planted in Angola. The very next year I came back because of the Tutsi Hutu genocide. You've probably read about that. It's 35 miles across the river. And there's another one just like it 50 miles south of Bukavu. It was estimated that about 1.8 million people were slaughtered in Rwanda. Another 1.5 million fled across this road into Goma. This is the only road coming, the only paved road coming out of Kigali, Rwanda, into Goma, Zaire. And 1.5 million people flooded across this road. And when they got there, they were living on volcanic lava flow, rocks like this. In fact, almost all of them died. The people who didn't die in the war and the famine got cholera, and they threw them into the Lake Bukavu. In fact, there are 50,000 bodies in this one mass grave, only marked by one little wooden cross. So people say, why do you do this? Well, you know, I was held hostage and shot at and all kinds of stuff, but we do it because God said to go. The Great Commission is to go to all the world and preach the gospel, to meet the physical needs of these people and bring them the story, the good news of Jesus Christ. So let's make it personal. I'd like to show you some of my friends. I love old Philip. He was just a young man when we first went to Rhodesia, our first time out there. We were Eagle Beavers, and so he and I ran the program. We started. Well, 41 years later, Marilee and I went back for 6 weeks just for vacation, and we took Kelsey, and we took one of my daughter's kids out there because our kids knew what Grandpa and Grandma did, but our grandkids didn't have a clue. 41 years later, Philip had started 8 churches in the surrounding area. Another guy I want to introduce you to is Benson Magojo and his brother Philip were just school kids that used to go with me out in the villages and translate for me when I was trying to learn Shona and preach. Well, 41 years later, Benson was now the head of the entire evangelical church in Zimbabwe, and he had started over 50 churches down the Zambezi Valley. Marilee and I funded his son all the way through the mission schools and primary and secondary and into Bible school, and now he and his dad are both in ministry together. I want to tell you about another guy, Abu, in 85 and 86 when I was up in Mali, West Africa. Yeah, just hold that. Abu was 6'6" and 240 pounds, the kind of guy you'd like to have with you in a dark alley if you had to be by yourself. Well, somebody sold our motorcycle. Abu says, no problem, I go steal it back. Nobody argued with Abu. But he had been down in the Copper Valley in Zambia, and so he learned Swahili. And I also learned Swahili when I was in Congo. So he and I can communicate fluently, and we became very good friends. And when I was ready to go home, he just came to me and says, I want to accept Jesus. I said, Abu, I was kind of teasing. Abu, you got Allah and Muhammad. Why would you want Jesus? And he said, well, we've been studying the Bible together, and Jesus prophesied his own death. Why would a great prophet prophesy his own death if he were not the lamb of the sacrifice? And even the Quran says that Jesus is the great prophet coming back at the end of the age. And Bonnie, if I don't accept Jesus, I don't think I'm going to get to heaven. But Bonnie, I'm Muslim, and my family may kill me. And if they kill me and I die and go to hell, I'm going to hold you responsible for my soul. And for the first time, it dawned on me why God is. God sent me after to be responsible for your soul. And then he could give it come Christ through those times. Let me tell you about another friend. When I first went to Congo, I heard Jameson Magojo.
No.
Jerome Ndukukwa. He and I started the program together. But every Sunday we'd fly across the Shari and go over to Baiwana.
The Shari is a little river.
Yeah, it's a little river, and a good sized river. We'd fly across to Baiwana and we'd preach under a tree to anybody who would come and listen. Well, I finally left, and when I came back in 1994, I asked I asked Diabo. Now let's get Diabo there. Diabo was working for us in '94, and I said, "Where's Jerome?" Well, Juana, he moved across over to the Shari, over by Juana. And there's a Vine Bridge across the river now. If we take the Picky down to the river, we can walk across. And so we walked into the village, and Jerome came running to me and said, "Juana, this is the church we built. I preach here to 40 families every Sunday." Jerome has never been to a day of Bible school in his life, but he and I used to have with each other for 10 years. And so we left him behind. Diabo, let me tell you about him. He was an amazing little guy. Yeah, the next picture. Diabo was an elder in the church there at the hospital, the big church, and he had an insatiable smile. In fact, you were there when I took this picture.
I think I took this picture.
You probably took this picture because Bob and Sonny Kobe Cook were out there with you on their little vision trip. And I was going to fly you, I won't tell, but I was going to fly you over to Masamar. We're going to spend a week in the game park, and then down to Mombasa to ride camels, and then up to Nairobi. But so this is the day we were leaving. Okay, the very next day, the rebels overran our station, and they shot Diabo as he was trying to run out of his African hut, and they killed 1,800 people on our mission station that day. I've told you now, those were the workmen. Yeah, let's go to the next picture. These are the workmen that were working for us at that time. And I've told you about Jerome Dukakwa and about Diabo. Let me tell you about one other guy. This is Barry Diro. He's a great young man. He and I communicate. He still calls me dad, and we email back and forth all the time. But we did a lot of preaching together. In fact, I raised $8,000, sent him over to Nairobi and got him a private pilot's license. I was trying to work him into the program.
Oh, he wanted to become a missionary pilot, and he was on track for that.
He was so sharp. He was one of the sharpest applicants we had out there.
Yeah. So, but I need to pause this particular picture because this is really your last. This was kind of the last series of trips you did in Africa, because then at this point, MAF had asked you to help raise money for some of the different planes, and then God was also putting on your heart a crazy idea, which was missions need to have a plane that's optimized for mission work.
Yeah, well, Cessna quit building airplanes. Cessna, Pepper Beach, all of them quit building for about 18 years in there because of product liability. So we couldn't buy any new airplanes.
Yeah. So what happened is God put on your heart, we need to design an airplane.
Yeah, why not us?
And build an airplane. Of course, one out of a million people who have that dream are successful. But what came out of it was the Quest Aircraft Company and this airplane called the Kodiak. And the business model of the organization was we'll sell planes commercially and use that to subsidize for mission groups to buy the plane. And I don't know how many Kodiaks there are in mission service now.
There are 42 in mission service, and we built about 200 and something of them now.
But it turned into an incredibly successful project. It's been on the cover of Flying Magazine several times, and different things. This would be worthy of a whole story in itself, in terms of just one miracle after another, in terms of how this turned into reality.
Yeah, this is a hard problem.
But we don't have time, so let's go back to the story of Barry Diro. And so Barry, he went out, he got his pilot's license. He was on track for his dream to become a pilot for MAF there in Africa, and then
because of that massacre, everybody evacuated.
All the missionaries left Congo.
His brother was the pastor on the station. He took his brother's kids and his family and fled to Kisangani.
Well, because his brother was killed.
Yeah, his brother was killed, along with the 1,800 others. And so everything in the hospital was shut down. Everything was stripped. Our airplanes were stripped. You can't imagine the devastation of the losses. I had just funded 2 brand new pickup trucks, and they were both stolen. The rebels drove them off the jungle. But anyway, Barry went down to Kisangani. He got a job with the UN. He's been down there ever since, except a year ago, the UN folded in Kisangani.
But Barry's kind of life vision switched from being a pilot to becoming a pastor.
Yeah. And he started the church, a church down in Kisangani. He's been working down there very diligently. And now he's gone up to Goma, and he's working in the church there.
And so this is really the pivot. Now that we're talking about how when Dad stopped flying overseas, but still said, well, God, what do you want me to do to serve? What can I do? This is Barry now. And when he was in Nyankundi, which was our mission station.
He's in the horn committee.
Yeah. So what happened is there's a German missionary named Vic Paul that in the 70s, early 70s, got the idea, Africans have incredible gifts for music, but you can't really have guitars and pianos and things in the jungle. It's too wet. It won't work. But you could have horns. So this missionary, German missionary, Vic Paul, got the idea, we're going to bring all these trumpets and tubas and
He brought several hundred of them.
hundreds of them over, and we're going to set up and they call them horn committees. We're going to set up these groups where he will teach the Africans to play music, and then that will become a huge attractant for other Africans to come and want to hear this music in terms of what happens.
Well, he gave the horns to the horn committee, and then they would pass them out to anybody who would use them every single week in a service.
You had to
If
commit.
you didn't use them in a service, they take the horn away.
So then what happened is Barry knew how to play the horns, and he said, I should do this for my new church down in Goma.
200 miles away down in Goma.
Yeah. And so then he asked you,
Just this last
he
year.
asked you to help raise money to buy some horns so we could set up a horn committee. And here we go. This is the African Brass Band. So the point is, if you're looking to find a way to support the God's kingdom building work around the world, there are so many different ways to do that. We'll give you one more that you've got.
So I sent out some money, and we bought 20 or 30 horns this last year, and now there's a horn committee down in Goma.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, this has been my ministry for the last really 25 or 30 years with John Christensen. He grew up with you on the mission
Yeah,
field.
we went to school.
Yeah. And he and his wife, Kathy, he moved to Kathy. But anyway, these kids have been my ministry. Kathy and John are missionaries on our old station. And one of the ministries is helping these missionary kids. Is there another picture? Yeah. These kids are the pastor's kids for the most part. Other family members get AIDS and die, and the pastors are celibate and they don't get the AIDS. And so they inherit 10 or 15 or 20 kids, and they get hardly any salary. So these kids will never go to school if somebody doesn't help them. So John's ministry is he's talked to his church down in Elizabeth, Tennessee, to set aside a special fund for him. So we can send money to John's church, and then the mission has primary, secondary, and Bible schools. And so these are the kids that I have funded this last year.
And education is really the only way for these African kids, especially the girls, to get out of subsistence farming and to get a life going. Education is just unbelievably powerful as a tool to get a life and be able to move forward. So it's been a wonderful thing.
Joseph is one of the guys who's now in Bible school, and he wants to be a pastor. So here the kids are in the school, and you can see they're playing Awana games, and they're all wearing their COVID masks. Even in Africa, they have to wear COVID masks. Okay, this is kind of a fun picture, because last time Dad and I were out there together, we went up the hangar, the roof had fallen in. No, the airplane had been gone for many years. And in fact, I built these bricks out of mud anthills and put them in a kiln and burned them and built the hangar. But now it was abandoned. So Dan and I put some money together, and we had them take these bricks apart and build a school for the kids from the African hospital staff. So they now have a school. Well, it's just fun to be part of their lives. I love these pastors and their kids.
So I guess the point is of the last few weeks that we've been doing here in the Sunday school class is find what God is calling you to do. I mean, it's been wonderful. I was very moved by the refugee, folks that we had recently and listening to them. But the key is find out what God is asking you to do. There's so many needs. And, here's another example. There's Lutheran World Missions. There's so many great opportunities. Another one is just a couple miles from us at World Concern, and they work through indigenous people. So your dollar goes very, very far. I'm just giving them as an example, but it's easy. And there's lots of groups like this. You can figure, in this case, do I want to help with building wells? Do I want to protect children from sexual trafficking? Do I want to worry, what is it that God calls me to do, right? What is it he's asked me to do? And you don't have to be an expert of these things. My dad plays the trumpet, just kidogo, kidogo. but he was able to help provide, funds to get something going, right? That's what God put on his heart at the time, education. You weren't a teacher. You were certainly a pastor in terms of and starting church, but you weren't a teacher, but God put that on your heart. And so what is it that God is calling us to do? And that's what we're asked for. And I think this picture really sums up.
This is not Africa, folks. This is New Guinea. But I was raising money and I got a donor to donate this airplane for out in New Guinea. So I did a vision trip out there. So I went out there. Now I told you I went to Africa in 1964.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 4 years after I went to Africa, Stan Dale and Pharaoh Masters were with Regions Beyond Missionary Union in New Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to reach these head-hunting cannibals up in the Belen Valley. So as they were going up to find them, they were caught and killed and eaten by these very guys. So these guys are cannibals. 50 years ago, I would have been eaten instead of staying there. But missionaries are tenacious and they kept trying and trying. And God laid it upon these cannibals' hearts to accept Jesus. And the chief said, sounds good to me and my 15 wives and our village and our tribe, and we will be Christian. We didn't understand this. But he brought his entire village and tribe down to the missionaries and said, we will be Christian. And I was with Don Gibbons up on his airstrip. And he said, night after night after night, I was burning fetishes from witchcraft, medicine, and various things on the end of my airstrip here. So these guys are now the new indigenous church. They are the new generation of evangelists, and we can fly them around. But we cannot abandon them now just because they're Christians. 98 cents of every dollar that comes into the Christian church here in America stays in America. We have to reach out and try to get these guys. Well, this is the new generation. These are the new believers. They need money to translate the Bible, to finish a songbook, to do a theological training by extension, to buy some horns, or to go to school. We cannot abandon this new generation of believers that are on the mission field.
Well, let's end with one last story. And then people can ask questions.
You mean about my friend Mother Teresa?
Yep, that's a good one.
Okay, I'll tell you that. We were out in Khartoum actually, trying to haul food down to southern Sudan, and I told you the Arab North was always at war with the animistic Black Africa South, and they were always throwing up roadblocks. And we even chartered a Hercules to haul food down there, and we could not get airborne. We would load the airplane and they come out at the last minute and ground us. So finally one day, somebody—
the government wanted them to start. The government
wanted, they were using it as genocide against the North, the South. So one day somebody came and knocked on our door and a little old lady was standing there and she said, I'm Mother Teresa. You're what? And so for about 3 or 4 days, she was with us, about a dozen of us pilots. And oh my goodness, I can remember, she looked like the wind was going to blow her over, and yet she was so profound. She told us all kinds of stories like God will take care of you if you just trust him. I never have any money. I don't have to carry money. I just go up to United Airlines and say, I am Mother Teresa. I need to get to Bangkok, or I need to get to Khartoum. And do you have room on your airplane? And God provides room on the airplane for me. I don't have to pay. And she said, I wish that God had never told me about heaven or hell. I wish I didn't know that there was a heaven or a hell, because then I would serve God out of a true motive of love and of commitment. And you think about that. And this is one of her sayings that she told us.
Yeah. I
can do some things, and you can do some things, but together we can do great things.
Yep.
And I can talk these, because of who I am, I can talk the Sudanese into letting you fly, and you can do the flying. So there are things that we can do together.
And you did. You got. Yeah. She talked to the government authorities.
Yeah.
And they let you fly
Somebody said,
the food.
if you want to be successful, find somebody else who is enjoyable. You
Mhm.
don't have to do everything yourself,
Mhm.
but with a little bit of money, you can put kids through school. With a little bit of money, you can feed the hungry. You can give worm medicine for pennies a day. So there is something for all of us to do. The Great Commission is still the mission of the church.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think at that point, John, if there's questions or whatever, we we tried to arrange it so there'll be some time at the end for folks if they've got questions. So
if anybody has a question, go ahead and jump in. Just unmute yourself and ask.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I am totally moved by the commitment that you received from God and the way in which you followed that commitment with your whole heart. You just inspired all of us.
Well, it was a great, great privilege. I never worked a day in my life. I was always doing what I wanted to do. Somebody said, "Oh, you sacrificed so much." I didn't sacrifice anything. I got to fly airplanes all across Africa. No, you don't sacrifice to serve God. You know, it's a great, amazing privilege. Are there hard times? Yeah, but that's when God shows up. And that's when you're talking one set of footprints, right? When he's carrying us. I mean, I've lost my wife. She passed away in 16. You know, lots of things that happen in life. But would I do it all over again? In a heartbeat.
I just want to thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting, and your devotion is just, you know, amazing to see. I'm very interested in hearing about your kidnapping episodes if you'd like to share that sometime. But I do have a question, and that is, you know, sitting here as a wife and mother, and I just wonder if you could say something about your wife, your mother, and what that must have been like for her to to be somebody's wife who's doing
Okay,
all of
well,
these amazing things and dangerous things also.
We hinted a little bit about that. Marilyn, I'm a pilot. I make split-second decisions. I'll fly across the jungle. Marilee was always cautious. I used to get so mad at her because I couldn't get her to jaywalk. She's a letter of the law person. And she had 5 miscarriages before we went to Africa. And then now she's pregnant. We're supposed to go to Africa. And as I mentioned, we took off. Diane was born 6 weeks early, 6 days after we got into Rhodesia. And then MEF asked us to move up into Belgian Congo. Man, I had built a station. We had 10 years. We had all friends in Zimbabwe. And now to go to the Congo, where I don't know the language, and we're 500 miles from the nearest gas station. And Marilee had a disease. She was always pregnant when we went to Africa. So David was born just 6 weeks after we got into the Congo. No doctor, and she had to have a midwife. No oxygen in the hospital. So I have to hand it to Marilee. She had more courage than me because she was left home sitting by the radio. Like when I was up in Sudan, I was gone for 6 weeks, and she had no clue where I was. In fact, she gave up and said, "I'll never get back."
or she told God that would be okay.
Yeah, she finally told God. She said, "The last day before you called in on the radio that you were airborne and coming home," she said, "I had told God that it's okay." And I said, "Why didn't you do that 3 or 4 weeks earlier?" But no, Marilee raised our kids in the jungle, and I was out having fun. I always knew where I was. I may be lost, but I knew where I was. I was in the airplane. She knew I was lost. We had a little signal because I called in every 15 minutes to give a position report. And
This is before GPS.
before
Long
GPS,
before.
yes, I threw all those thousands of hours with no GPS across solid jungle. And if I was lost or in bad weather, I would give a position report, Charlie Alpha 93, because it's all cut up latitude and longitude. And if I put the word X-ray behind, because we were on the same frequency with all the missionaries. I didn't want the missionaries to know I was lost. I was only temporarily disoriented. I wasn't lost. I was never lost. But I would throw that in there just so that she would stay close to the radio. And so she sat there every day, and I was launched out of her solid jungle and there was no way to walk home. 200-foot trees, if you crash into the trees, you'll penetrate 75 feet into the canopy. And even if you burn, you won't burn the canopy. Nobody will ever find you, and there's no way to walk home. Day after day, I was doing that, and she was sitting home. I mean, I'm a guy. This is my calling. But she had to sit home and think about that and worry about that every single day. So I really do hand it to Mary to homeschool our kids, and it was hard for her to see them all fly off to boarding school and be alone. Missionaries say they have to keep having kids because every time one goes off to boarding school, they have to replace them. So
yeah, but she wanted to be there.
oh my goodness,
She wanted to
my
be
goodness.
there, and it was a commitment.
Before I asked her to marry me, I said, I have two questions. One is, have you ever felt called to be a missionary? And the second question, I said, I have two questions. The second one has a bearing on the first one. I said, have you ever felt like you wanted to be a missionary? And she said, yes. So then this is how romantic I was. I said, well, would you like to do that with me? And
So she had her own calling.
so I made that commitment before I asked her to marry me. Do you feel called? Is it your calling? And she did. So she was so smart. She was a lot smarter than me.
Well, she ran the business. I mean,
Yeah.
a flight program like that it's a business. You've got to figure the loads. You got to figure out the routes to be most efficient. You've got to figure out how much gas you need. And she would, whenever you had room in the plane, she was having you put extra gas in so you could offload it at these different places. It was a
third of our airstrips were under gross load. We could land with full load, but we couldn't take off with a full load. So she had to know, can I take 4 people or can I take 5 people? Can I take all 6 people? How many pounds do you have? Where do you have fuel stored? Maybe you have to go light here and you have to refuel because we have kept fuel stored all around. And
it was an amazing.
She was amazing memory, just amazing. Brilliant. So she was a very, very key. It was a team effort. It was absolutely a team effort.
Yeah, thank you.
In all those 40 years, did you have to come back to the States often? Once
Well,
a year, or how did that work?
the mission had 4-year terms, but the first 2 terms we were out there, I wrote to them and said, hey, I'm not coming home. I feel called to this. Why would I want to? In fact, we had no vacations for the first 5 years. Why would you want to leave this to go to? I'm having too much fun. And if I leave, the airplane is not there for an emergency flight. So we never went on vacation, and we stayed 5 years instead of 4 years. So we came home the first 2 times after 5 years, and then they switched it to a 3-year term and 6 months at home. So,
but really the reason that you came back to the States was more training, because as other planes and things went out, or then you got Loran before GPS was available. So more training, and then also the program, the funding, the gas, the airplane, everything was all supported by churches and individuals. So after 5 years, if you don't ever come back and talk to those people, they all just fade away. So the MAF knew that you needed to come back for long enough to at least go around and visit everybody, just remind them why you were there and why they were doing what they're doing. Because the Africans couldn't. I mean, the Africans can't pay for gas. You get a couple chickens every so often, but so all the expenses have to be covered.
Yeah.
You
So
come back for about 6 months at a time then.
Yeah. So all of us are pilot mechanics. I'm an FAA inspector. I've rebuilt airplanes and signed logbooks to go fly them. So I'm an FAA inspector. We have to be a commercial instrument, multi-engine rated. So we're commercial pilots. We really are. But we also are licensed mechanics. But then, did I tell you they don't pay you? You have to go on radio support. And by the way, you have to go to language school and learn language. And by the way, you're gonna have to live 500 miles away from the nearest gas station grocery store. So you're gonna have to be in the bush. So there's a lot to being a missionary or missionary pilot. But we did have to come home to raise our personal support. And then in later years, I raised money for the mission. I was usually raising significant money for the mission. And then when I started the aircraft company, I raised it through donations. So I raised $60 million to do the R&D on just small things like that.
How much was your mission support each year while you were in Africa, just for your family and the work that you did?
Well, when we first went to Africa, it was $240 a month.
Okay.
And I had to raise the money to build our house. I had to build the bricks and build the house, you know, so it was self-sufficient. It was, you know, but yeah, you got to, so we had pooled support. So we would raise $240 a month and it would go into the mission. And then if one of our supporters would die, MEF would keep on paying us, but it would come out of the general fund or out of the pool until we could re-raise it. But we were still responsible to raise our minimum support.
Okay.
But it was just a subsistence.
But for the
stipend.
whole, the whole amount with the airplanes and everything was several $1,000s a month
Oh,
for gas and oil and everything
yeah.
and parts.
See, we raised our own personal support, but then the mission raised money for gas, oil, you know, all the housing and hangars, and you know, no missionary could afford to charter his own airplane in the middle of the jungle. So we had, the mission had to subsidize all that.
Other questions people have?
Were your lives ever threatened? I recall reading Through the Gates of Splendor, and Jim Elliot and the missionaries were speared to death. Were you ever in any danger?
Oh no, never. I was sitting up in Bible
Your
school.
nose is going to grow long.
I was sitting in Bible school when that happened, 1956. In fact, we were listening to the commercial radio station, and an unsaved news announcer was saying, "Hey, we have breaking news from Ecuador. There are 5 missionaries that are missing and perhaps killed by a savage tribe of Elka." I was up at Prairie Valley Ministry. You could hear, you know, there were 500 of us there studying to be missionaries. And we studied about C.T. Studd and Carey and Moffat and Hudson Taylor and Livingston, all those guys. But here, guys, our age, in our generation, dying for the sake of Christ. That was a missionary call. And I was sitting there at the dining room table, and I said, God, I can do that. So I really got my missionary call to aviation from an unsaved news announcer sitting at a breakfast table. and yeah, I was caught several times and with hostage situations, and I was forced down over Uganda with Idi Amin. In fact, there were 2 of us airplanes flying over, and we were both forced down. They had MiGs on the ground, and they threatened to send MiGs after us, so we didn't come back and land, and we were harassed. And we had 2 loads of short-term missionary kids on board. They were petrified to be caught in Uganda in those years. So yeah, there was danger frequently, yeah. And just the danger of flying single-engine airplanes out over solid jungle day after day after day, and building all your own airstrips. We don't have 10,000-foot tarmac runways. No, we've got roads and riverbanks and, you know, jungle strips. We mud. I mean, I've buried those airplanes till you can't see what color they are with the mud flying. You know, this is routine, everyday stuff. But that's how you learn to trust God. And I can honestly say, I know dozens of times when I wouldn't have made it if God had not opened up a window in the clouds or find some way home. I've been caught in bad weather, and you know, many, many times there have been miracles happen that made it, that kept me from killing myself, you know, on takeoff, trying to coming inches off the top of all the stumps on the climb out and stuff, because the tires got caught in the mud on takeoff. So yeah, there were lots and lots of times, but also lots of times to see God at work, and the joy of sitting with the Africans and seeing them come to Christ. They were good years.
Dan, I'm curious about your experience and your siblings' experience. Was it all positive for all of you? Did you all experience your time in Africa in a very positive way with great memories, or were there some real hardships in growing up in that setting as Americans?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question for missionary kids. So I can say that my experience was fantastic. And I loved it, but it was hard because the only schooling, once you got beyond where mom could teach you, you had to go away to boarding school, and that's a lonely thing. And for a lot of missionary kids, that is a really, really hard thing in terms of just the dynamics. And that's a sacrifice that the parents make too, to have your kids go away for 3 months and not see them, and then come home for a month and then go on for 3 months. So, I think that part is hard. And I think for kids, I'm so fortunate that, my dad really wrote me into all the stuff he was doing. So I felt like I was part of it as a kid. I mean, I was, working with the spanners and, riding the tractors and painting the hospital. I mean, I was involved. And so I felt like I was a part of it. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of missionary kids, I feel like for whatever reason, they don't feel like they're part of what's going on, and they start to resent, I think, what happened. It can happen, right? I know I have missionary kids who are friends of mine who they resented their time there.
Yeah.
And, and I don't know.
But I try to make it fun. If you take a roll of toilet paper and unroll about 2-3 feet of it and roll it back, and then if you flip it out the window of the airplane, you'll put a 1,000-foot streamer out over the mission station. And especially when you're going over the boarding school and you drop 1,000 foot of toilet paper down on top of the boarding school.
Yeah.
So I tried to make it fun. When I was flying with Serengeti and the kids were on board, I had eight or 10 kids on board. Yeah, there's no FAA around, so I was 50 feet off the backs of wildebeest. For 45 minutes, you could hardly see the ground for animals. And try to make it fun for the kids and do things for. Even when we were in Congo, there was no place to drive, but I had a little Volkswagen Combi because I wanted to be able to drive out in the bush with the kids and picnic and things like that. We went out to the farm. And
but I think the lesson, the lesson, I think, for all of us as parents, right? I'm a parent with grown children and now grandchildren too, right? And I think the lesson to all of us is how do you help your kids, your grandkids, whatever, feel the passion that you have about serving Christ in terms of whatever that's going to be. How do you incorporate them in that?
Yes.
So it's their experience and enjoyment too, not that something like dad or granddad or mom does. But this is our family thing, and I know there's many families that are fantastic at that, whether it's taking your kids down to serve Thanksgiving dinner at the Union Gospel Mission or whatever. But somehow make it a family thing.
Yes.
And not, this is dad and mom's thing, and I'm just kind of along for the ride.
Yeah.
And I think, those principles, whether you're in Africa or you're in Edmonds, are exactly the same. Exactly the same.
Great. Well, unless there's a last question, maybe Dave, would you mind closing us in prayer?
Oh, gracious God, we are so glad to do so. We just are thankful for your mercy and grace, and day by day calling us to be your children. And saving us, Lord, and giving us vision, giving us purpose in life. Lord, without you, we can do nothing. And yet with you, you do great things. So even like Mother Teresa, all of us can do something. And so we just pray that none of us will lose the joy and lose the excitement, Lord, of standing before you and hearing you say, well done, good and faithful servant. Lord, how terrible it would be to get up there and be ashamed. And we don't want to be ashamed of you here on earth, and we don't want you to be ashamed of us when we stand before you. So thank you, Lord, for all the ministry opportunities you give us. All of us have ministry opportunities to do something for you. And so we just pray that you'll use these few pictures and maybe these few illustrations to motivate somebody to want to serve you better and with more fervor. And so we thank you, Lord, for John and for his ministry. And Lord, I just thank you for Dan and our family that have walked with you and experienced you in our lives day by day, Lord, giving us the strength and ability and keeping us till now. Lord, you promised that you will never leave us or forsake us. And we found that to be true. So thank you, Lord, for this time together. And we just commit ourselves to you in Jesus' name for his sake. And for the sake of the lost. Amen.
Amen. Thank you to you both. Terrific, terrific, terrific. Wonderful presentation. So enjoyed the stories and know how heartfelt those experiences have been for you both. So thank you. Yes, I think we're all.
Thank you.
Well, that's one half of 1%.
I'm sure you can
Sometime maybe we do it again.
Yeah.
God bless you, John.
Yeah. God bless you both.
Okay.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks again.